Turning to the wider Gulf region, heavy thunderstorms and rainfall resulted in severe floods this week.
Oh my God!
Proverbs is true. A haughty spirit goes before a fall, and something before destruction just occurred in Jerusalem. While you are listening to this, while most of the Western world lies in that deep, heavy silence that comes just before dawn, thousands of people literally stopped their chores, left their places, canceled their appointments and commitments, and rushed to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem when they saw something no one expected. It was not an earthquake. It was not air rage. It was not some statement on a political stage. What happened was far older, far deeper, far more significant than anything a news reporter could broadcast. And what's even more shocking is the global media, totally silent. Mainstream kept focusing on fast-consuming content, on scandal, on whether the most cutting-edge technology belongs to which country, on which celebrities just got divorced, on the money that should be used for more meaningful work than outward glamour. Something that's making waves not just in Israel, but around the entire world. Something that left even the most non-believers speechless. Something that made rabbis get up at midnight with their hearts racing. That made prophecy teachers close their laptops and grab their phones. That made pastors, priests, and spiritual leaders from very different backgrounds all send the same urgent message to one another. Are you seeing this? And what makes this absolutely extraordinary isn't just what appeared, but where it appeared and when it appeared. Because it isn't just any ordinary city, but Jerusalem. It's the most prophetically charged location in the entire Bible, with the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, the Golden Gate, the Gethsemane Garden, and most significant, the Mount of Olives. Something is happening at the place where Jesus ascended to heaven before the disciples, where the Bible specifically prophesies that Jesus will return visibly when he comes back to earth. And something is making people worldwide pay attention. When you get the terrifying truth exactly happening there, when you capture the prophetic connection impossible to ignore, when you relate the implications of the timing of all this, you'll understand why thousands of people reacted like a programmed chain, shocked, then stunned, then panicked, and then fled. Because we're not talking about coincidence. We're talking about sign from God through verifiable physical events. The countdown to the appointed time is pacing faster than you could imagine. Let me give you the historical and prophetic context of the Mount of Olives before revealing what emerged there. Because without this context, you won't fully understand the frightening magnitude of what's happening. And because the tragedy just happened in the Holy City seems to be just a veil, covering something enormous, crucial, that is quietly unfolding. The Mount of Olives rises on the eastern side of Jerusalem, separated from the ancient city by the Kidron Valley. Its ridge, reaching nearly 827 meters at its highest point, offers a sweeping view of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. But its true weight is not measured in height or geography. This mount is steeped layer upon layer with sacred history, prophetic meaning, and spiritual warning. It was on this very slope, in the shadow of the city God chose for his name, that King Solomon once called Jedediah, beloved of the Lord, 2 Samuel 12:25, fell into the deepest compromise of his life. Though endowed with unmatched wisdom, his heart drifted as his many foreign wives turned him toward the worship of forbidden gods, Ashtoreth of Sidon, Chemosh of Moab, and Molech of Ammon, 1 Kings 11-4:10. And in direct violation of God's command, Solomon built shrines on the Mount of Olives itself. shrines that stood like wounds on the very hillside east of Jerusalem. What began as political alliances and indulgent desire soon corroded the spiritual foundation of the nation. The king who was meant to shepherd Israel into purity became instead a cautionary tale of divided loyalty and a defiled altar. The Mount of Olives became a silent witness, a high place where the scent of idolatry rose alongside the memory of divine favor squandered. Yet this same mount would later become an intimate refuge for Jesus during his earthly ministry. Luke 21:37 tells us that each day he taught in the temple, and each evening he withdrew to spend the night on the Mount of Olives. It was where he stepped away from the crowds to commune with the Father. And at the foot of that very mount, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he entered the darkest anguish of his life, praying until his sweat fell like drops of blood, surrendering himself to the Father's will on the eve of the cross. Betrayal met him there. Soldiers arrested him there. The Mount of Olives carried the weight of his sorrow before the world ever saw the weight of his sacrifice. But the Mount also witnessed glory. After his resurrection, it was from the Mount of Olives that Jesus ascended into heaven. Acts 1-9-12. The disciples stood stunned as he rose before their eyes, lifted into the clouds, until two angels appeared with a message that still echoes through every generation. This same Jesus will come back in the same way you have seen him go. A promise uttered in white garments, sealed in heaven's authority. And Scripture makes the destination unmistakable. Zechariah 14:4 foretells a day when his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, and the mountain will split from east to west, forming a vast valley, an event no science can fully explain, yet no prophecy can soften. The very ground that felt his sorrow and witnessed his ascent will feel the weight of his returning glory. So the Mount of Olives is not merely a scenic ridge overlooking Jerusalem. It is the sacred stage of past anguish, present warning, and future glory. It is where Jesus wept, where Jesus prayed, where Jesus ascended, where Jesus will return. And now, at this very moment in history, something grievous has unfolded on that same mount only a few days ago. Something that has caused thousands to stop, grieve, and look up with trembling attention. The tragedy has shaken many, precisely because it happened there on the same hillside where Solomon once let compromise poison a nation. As if the echoes of his downfall now mirror the fractures in our own age. A society seduced by indulgence, alliances of convenience, and a faith diluted by distraction. And against that backdrop, ancient warning meeting modern unrest. This new, sorrow-filled event on the Mount of Olives has emerged like a dark signpost, urging us to watch, to discern, and to ready our hearts for what may follow. The tremor that struck the Mount of Olives 2 nights ago measured barely enough to raise alarm, just a brief shaking that should have passed unnoticed in a city accustomed to the groans of ancient stone. Yet what followed made even seasoned Jerusalemites stand silent beneath the night sky. It was as though the earth itself remembered prophecies, long dormant. Residents near the summit reported hearing church bells ringing on their own, swaying without a human hand. The bell tower of a small chapel overlooking Gethsemane shook for nearly 20 seconds, the metal tongue striking the bronze with a rhythm that felt too deliberate to be accidental. One elderly deacon said, "I've served here for 40 years. The bells never ring like that unless someone pulls the rope. Last night, it felt called." At the same moment, along the slope where ancient olive trees have stood for centuries, the trees inexplicably bent in unison, all leaning toward the east, as if pushed by a wind no one else could feel. Pilgrims who witnessed it described a strange stillness in the air. It was like the garden was bowing. A tourist from Italy said, "The leaves were trembling, but the air around us was dead still. No breeze. Nothing." And then came the collapse. Inside a tiny stone church near the base of the mount, a simple statue of Christ, no more than a meter tall, fell from its pedestal without any structural damage to the building itself. It did not topple forward or backward but slid sideways, landing face down as though pushed by an unseen hand. The caretaker, shaken and pale, whispered, "I heard no cracking stone, no breaking beam, just the thud," and the room went cold. But the most startling sign did not come from above. It came rushing from below. Only minutes after the tremor, an unexpected flood tore through the Kidron Valley. With no rain in Jerusalem that evening, none at all, the valley suddenly filled with a surge of water, roaring down its ancient channel, carrying branches, stones, and debris, as though a storm had burst upon the city. Security cameras captured the torrent cutting through footpaths, sweeping away lampposts, and pouring against the retaining walls near the tombs of the prophets. The baffling part? Meteorologists confirmed that not a single cloud formation in the region could explain the deluge. The imagery was impossible to ignore. A shaking of the mount, an uncaused ringing of bells, a forced bowing of ancient trees, a fallen statue, and a flood rushing through the Kidron, the very valley associated in Scripture with judgment, purification, and the path Christ once took on the night of his betrayal. Those who know the Scriptures could not help but recall words like Luke 21:11, earthquakes in divers places, and fearful sights, and Zechariah's description of a day when the very landscape around Jerusalem would be shaken and reshaped. Some rabbis have even pointed to Joel 3, where the valleys east of the city become the theater of divine decisions. And yet, even now, investigators are whispering that one piece of the event does not fit any natural explanation at all, a detail officials have not released, and locals are only beginning to talk about in hushed tones. A detail from the mount itself. A detail some say could change everything once it comes to light. At first, it was nothing more than a hairline fracture, so slender that an untrained eye might have mistaken it for the natural aging of ancient stone. It appeared quietly along the eastern retaining wall, just below the sealed arches of the Golden Gate. No tremor was recorded, no explosion heard, and yet the stone had been disturbed. Tourists noticed it first, a faint, almost delicate fissure tracing downward like a single stroke of ink on parchment. But such a detail in Jerusalem is never just a detail. Scholars began to measure it. Engineers dismissed it as surface stress, but the old rabbis, those who still speak in the cadence of prophets, shook their heads. They murmured of Zechariah's warning that the Mount of Olives would split. They recalled Ezekiel's vision of glory entering through the east gate. They whispered how the stones of the wall shall cry out, and wondered aloud whether this was one such cry, small, restrained, but unmistakably present. And then came the unsettling part. Within days, the crack deepened. A thin line widened just enough for a person to slip a hand into the gap. Dust fell in intermittent drizzles. Pilgrims reported a low, tremor-like hum near the ancient blocks, as if something beneath the city had awakened from long stillness. No one could agree on the source, but everyone sensed the same thing. This was not ordinary decay. Jerusalem has endured sieges, fires, and earthquakes across millennia. Yet rarely does the city whisper before it groans. Rarely does warning come so subtly, yet so pointedly etched into her very stones. For those with eyes trained by Scripture, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. A fracture at the threshold of the gate, long associated with Messiah's return, appearing at a time already shadowed by unrest, felt less like an accident and more like a divine punctuation mark. A small wound, yes, but one that hinted a larger break was coming. This fracture, small as it is, exposes something far larger. Our generation's spiritual exhaustion, our numbness to holy realities, our casual familiarity with sacred things. When stones speak louder than saints, there is a problem. Israel is not the only nation trembling. America trembles. Europe trembles. The world trembles in confusion, division, violence, and unprecedented moral unraveling. Yet even in this shaking, God is not silent. The crack in Jerusalem is more than a local phenomenon. It is a mirror held before the faces of all nations. It asks, "Are you ready for what comes next? Are you awake? Do you discern the hour?" And perhaps this question lands at an uncomfortable moment because, for many, life right now feels full. Full of pleasure, full of noise, full of the kinds of delights that mask themselves as harmless joys but quietly drain the soul. Our age has perfected distraction. It has polished indulgence until it gleams like virtue. People celebrate what once brought shame. They applaud excess as freedom. They wear compromise like a crown. And in many ways, this is not new. Jerusalem saw this pattern before. Kings, once chosen by God, set apart, blessed, entrusted with wisdom and responsibility, slowly surrendered their hearts to the pleasures of foreign courts. They traded devotion for diplomacy, purity for politics, worship for the company of those who bowed to strange gods. The very rulers who were meant to guard the faith invited corruption into their homes, their altars, their city. Their joy became intoxication. Their comfort became bondage. Their pleasures became their downfall. And beloved, does not our generation tremble on the same edge? While the world laughs, eats, drinks, builds, buys, and entertains itself without restraint, a fracture has appeared on the eastern wall, a wound on Jerusalem's ancient stones, quiet, subtle, but undeniably real, a reminder that no amount of worldly bliss, no chorus of earthly amusements, can silence the warnings etched into the center of God's story. The tragic sign we have witnessed is not merely about geology or chance. It is a divine interruption, a holy intrusion into a culture drunk on its own happiness, a call to remember that a life wrapped too tightly around earthly pleasures grows deaf to heavenly truth, a reminder that those who chase the world's delights too fervently often lose their ability to discern danger until it is too late. And this is where we must pause, because if the ground beneath Jerusalem can tremble while the world feasts, what does that say to us? If kings once favored by God could fall because they loved pleasure more than obedience, what warning does that offer to this generation? The fracture warns us that not all joys are innocent, not all pleasures are neutral, and not all lifestyles the world celebrates are compatible with a faithful heart. And perhaps the reason this sign unsettles us so deeply is because, at its core, that the soul slowly shaped by the world will eventually lose its ability to recognize the voice of God. And this, beloved, brings us to a deeper question. A question we must now explore. Why must a true believer guard the heart so fiercely against the seduction of worldly values and pleasures? Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. 1 John 2:15. These are not the words of a cold ascetic, nor the counsel of a man hardened by suspicion of life's joys. They were spoken by the apostle, most shaped by the compassion of Christ, the disciple who leaned upon his master's breast. And if he spoke such a severe warning, then it is because the Spirit of God knew how subtle, how seductive, and how spiritually corrosive the world's affections can be. The call is clear. Friendship with the world is hostility toward God, not merely because the world is wicked in its pleasures, but because the spiritual life is exquisitely delicate, like a lamp easily dimmed by polluted air. The soul breathes, and the atmosphere of a fallen world is heavy with fumes that choke devotion, cloud discernment, and slowly reshape the desires of the heart. Would that the people of God took this warning more seriously. We are called to be a distinct people, not isolated, but different, marked, unmistakably set apart, chosen out of the world, though kept in it for a time to bear witness. Yet many who name the name of Christ now ask the wrong question. How close can I get to the world without losing my Christian integrity? This question does not arise from holiness, but from compromise. It assumes the world is harmless until proven otherwise, and that the boundary of sin lies somewhere inches beyond our comfort. But the truth acknowledged by saints of old and the sensitive conscience of every true believer is this: the love of the world reveals itself differently in each person, but the Spirit faithfully whispers His warnings within, and those who walk closely with God will sense those whispers clearly. There can be no fixed list, no universal rule covering every situation, because the temptations of the world adjust themselves to personality, upbringing, status, and season. What ensnares one may barely tempt another. Yet, every follower of Christ is responsible to trace their own path of obedience, and they will always see that path most clearly when they are walking in the light. But perhaps the greatest problem is that the question itself is reversed. For those who have truly tasted the glory of the risen Christ, for those who have been lifted to heavenly places and taught to set their affections on the things above, the issue is no longer, how far may I conform to the world, but rather, how far may I separate from the world without neglecting the assignment God has placed on my life? That is the cry of a soul awakened. That is the posture of one who sees the cracks forming at Jerusalem's walls and refuses to sleep through the warnings. That is the heart of one who knows the world's pleasures are not merely distractions, they are slow poisons, honeyed chains, gilded traps, crafted to dull the senses and detach the heart from God. It is a perilous thing to measure how near one may walk to the cliff's edge without tumbling over. No one cradles fire against the chest and walks away unscathed. No one handles burning coals and expects unstained garments. And no believer, whose ears have once heard even the faintest echo of the worship of heaven, can long find satisfaction in the hollow melodies of a world fading toward judgment. For the issue is not merely that we must not mingle too deeply with the world. It is that, when the heart is rightly aligned, we simply have no desire to. The narrow way may be steep, lonely, and often thorned. Yet it is sweeter to the redeemed than any broad road glittering with 1,000 invitations. The soul that has tasted the joy Christ gives finds the world's pleasures not only shallow, but strangely bitter. Why should we cling to anything that dims our sight of the hope set before us, that radiant promise toward which every longing of the renewed heart leans? Are we not strangers and pilgrims in this land? Do we not confess that we seek a better country, one that is heavenly? Then, how can we justify chaining ourselves to distractions that only slow our steps? Why load our backs with weights that heaven never asked us to carry? Why linger among amusements that soften conviction and quiet the voice of the Spirit? The pilgrim who knows his destination will respond to every worldly enticement with the same simple answer: I cannot stay with you. I am walking homeward. But because our age is filled with confusion, an age intoxicated with entertainment, spectacle, noise, and the glitter of public amusements, certain questions must be spoken of with humility, not to judge another's conscience, but to help the believer discern the dangers hidden in plain sight. In every generation, certain pleasures arise that appear harmless, even refined, celebrated by good and sincere people. So the debate often resurfaces. Are these things wrong? Are they acceptable? Music, for instance, is held up as proof that beauty itself cannot be sinful. And indeed, music consecrated to God becomes a ladder for the spirit, lifting the soul upward when it grows weary or earthbound. Even simple music in the home, shared among family. Religion has never sought to shrink the circle of joy, it purifies joy and crowns it. And yet, this does not settle the question at hand. For what is innocent in the quiet sanctuary of home may become something quite different in the crowded hall, where spectacle replaces devotion, and pleasure blends with pride, vanity, and temptation. The difference is not merely in the music, but in the atmosphere, the setting, the spirit that surrounds it. We cannot reason from what belongs to heaven's purity, and apply it uncritically to a world still soaked in sin. What is harmless to the pure may become fuel for corruption in the heart not guarded. What is neutral in itself may turn destructive when wrapped in an environment that stirs vanity, sensuality, comparison, or spiritual lethargy. This world has a way of taking what is beautiful and bending it just enough to make the soul loosen its grip on holiness. And here, beloved, is the heart of the matter. Even good things become dangerous when they awaken desires that lead us away from God. This is the unchanging reality of life, under the shadow of the crack, in a Jerusalem, where the ancient stones themselves warn us that compromise is never small, never harmless, never without consequence. It may be true that certain entertainments of our age, be they gatherings, festivals, or the glittering spectacles that draw crowds night after night, are not sinful in themselves. One could argue that listening to music in a public square is no worse, in essence, than handling cards or dice, and yet no one defends the habits that spring from gambling, though the objects themselves are harmless. The danger rarely lies in the object. It lies in the trajectory it creates in the heart. So, let the believer, laying aside pride and self-justification, examine his own soul in the fear of God. Does mingling with the world's amusements weaken his spiritual pulse? Does it cool the flame of love for Christ? Does it blunt the sharp edge of conviction? Can he truly ask God's blessing on what he is about to partake in? Can he pray honestly that his presence there would glorify Christ, honor the gospel, and strengthen the faith of those around him? Does he sense that such places deepen his capacity to do his master's work, to win the wandering, to uphold the weak, to speak of Christ without shame? We all know the answer. The world itself knows the answer. Who among us has not felt the impropriety of speaking of holy things amid scenes built to drown out the voice of conscience? For how can the Christian freely speak of eternal matters in places crafted for indulgence, noise, vanity, and escape? And if the name of Christ cannot be comfortably spoken there, should the servant of Christ be comfortable there? Let the believer search deeper still. Does he rise from such places with a clearer mind for prayer? Does he enter the secret place with renewed tenderness, ready to commune with the Father? Or do the impressions of earthly delight still cling to him, echoing, distracting, dimming the voice of God? Does the spirit not find itself heavier, slower, more chained to things seen and felt, less eager to soar toward the unseen? And if we already face so many unavoidable hindrances along the narrow road, what wisdom is there in adding our own? For like the prophets warned, the time is short, the arrows of judgment fly swiftly. Jerusalem itself trembles beneath our feet. No one knows which moment may summon us to stand before the Judge of all the earth. And would we want to be found in such places when that moment comes? Would we wish our last breath to rise from a house of indulgence, a hall of distraction, a place where the presence of God feels foreign? Even if a believer feels personally secure, even if he thinks himself unharmed, there remains a higher rule. All things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. Paul refrained even from innocent things when they threatened to stumble a weaker soul. How different our world might look if more Christians walked with his care, his restraint, his holy caution. For when a professing believer steps across the boundary between devotion and distraction, the world sees it instantly. The world, though corrupt, is keen-eyed in spotting inconsistency. It notices the slightest crack in Christian character, and we give it reason to dismiss the seriousness of the faith we claim. And once we begin to bend to the world's pleasures, where do we draw the line? If we allow this, why not that? If we walk a few steps into the fog, why not deeper still? Thus it happens that one small compromise quiets conviction. One concession dulls the voice of the Spirit. One indulgence leads to another, until the soul slips further from God than it ever intended to go. And here, beloved, is the most sobering question. Have we perhaps unintentionally led someone else astray by our carelessness? Someone tender-hearted, close to repentance, turned back by the sight of our compromise? Let each reader bring these matters into prayer. Lay them before God honestly. Ask Him whether these indulgences strengthen or weaken your soul, lighten or weigh down your steps, build up or tear down your walk with Christ. We do not judge another's liberty, God forbid, but we lovingly plead with the saints to consider whether such pathways, even if they feel safe, subtly erode the spiritual life and make the narrow road harder, darker, and more confusing for the weaker ones who follow behind. But when all is said and done, everything returns to one place, the heart. It is the hidden chamber where every choice is conceived, every affection formed, every allegiance revealed. If the root is sound, the fruit will not lie. If the spring is clean, the stream will run clear. And unless the heart is surrendered into the hands of the one who alone can remake it, no amount of external restraint will bring lasting holiness. When He becomes the true north of our affections, the glitter of this world loses its pull, and the magnet of the soul steadies toward Him with a firmness no earthly pleasure can shake. And one cannot help but wonder, if the saints of old, those who walked before us with scars on their backs and fire in their bones, were suddenly to return and behold the modern church, what would they see? Would they recognize in us the steel-spined devotion, the patient endurance, the refusal to compromise with anything that dulls the edge of conscience? Or would their hearts sink at the ease, the softness, the blurred lines that now mark the lives of many who bear Christ's name? Would they not be startled at how thin the boundary has become between the world and those who claim they have renounced it? Would they not marvel perhaps with grief at how comfortably many believers move between prayer meetings and worldly entertainments, between worship and indulgence, between the sanctuary and the ballroom? Would they not cry out, with sorrow rather than anger, "How has the gold lost its luster? How has the consecrated become common?" Truly, the faith of our age often asks little cost. We know so little of sacrifice, so little of counting anything loss for Christ, so little of the rugged narrowness that once defined the pilgrim path. In earlier generations, to stand with Christ meant reproach. Now, it often grants respectability. As Bunyan once said, "Religion now walks in silver slippers." But the question remains, has the Church gained strength from this ease, or has she quietly grown sleepy under the warmth of the world's smile? For the calm that flatters may be more perilous than the storm that wounds, and the river that flows wide and gentle may be the one that slowly leads the boat astray. If Jerusalem's sudden fissure warns us that nations can drift into judgment without noticing the ground shifting beneath them, then surely the Church must not drift in the same silent way. Let her beware of lingering in the plains of Sodom, gazing, delaying, hesitating, rather than pressing with girded loins toward the refuge God has appointed. For He who walks among the lampstands still examines His people, and His steps are never rushed, but they are never uncertain. Let no church assume the bridegroom delays. And because the Church is not a faceless multitude, but a tapestry woven of individual hearts, each believer must turn inward and ask whether his conscience aligns with the word he professes to follow. Do not hesitate to stand openly, firmly, and without apology on the Lord's side. Obedience that separates you from the world will not impoverish you. It will anchor you. The peace promised to those who come out and be separate is a peace the world does not know how to give because it cannot. The joy, full of glory, does not bloom in the half-shaded soil of compromise. Go forward. Do not settle for a thin, miniature version of Christian life, a name without power, a profession without depth. Seek the fullness of the covenant that Christ sealed with his own blood. Drink from the well that never runs dry, and you will no longer thirst for the brackish pools of the world. Pray to be rooted, settled, and strengthened not like a reed trembling with every gust, but like a deeply planted tree whose branches grow heavy with good fruit. Live in such a way that those around you can tell, without you saying a word, whom you belong to and whom you serve. Remember that every soldier under the banner of Christ is called to wrestle against three relentless foes: sin, the world, and the devil. Clothe yourself with the armor God himself provides. Let Christ in you be both your courage and your cry. Let the hope of the crown set before you give shape to every step. For this is the victory that overcomes the world, not through strength, not through intellect, but through faith. A faith that keeps one foot already in the unseen realm, so that when the call finally comes, the land beyond the veil will not feel foreign, but home. Jerusalem has always been a city where whispers carry the weight of prophecies, or so call, the pioneer of destruction. And today, we stand before one such whisper. A hairline fracture so thin at first that it seemed inconsequential appearing beneath the sealed eastern gate, a crack that slowly widened, deepened, and pressed itself into the consciousness of a watching world. Some dismiss it as time and pressure. Others call it coincidence. But there are those scholars, pastors, rabbis, pilgrims, whose hearts tremble at the sight because they recognize that even the smallest movement in Jerusalem rarely happens without meaning. Let us begin where Scripture teaches us to begin, with humility. God often chooses the small things to confound the mighty, the whisper to confront the tempest, the mustard seed to move mountains, and yes, the crack in the stone to awaken a sleeping generation. When the first pilgrims noticed the fracture, they thought little of it. Jerusalem is old. Stones shift. Weather wears. Life goes on. But when the dust began to fall in thin streams, when the crack pressed deeper, as though something beneath the city exhaled for the first time in ages, and when the faint hum, subtle yet unmistakable, was reported by those who stood near the ancient walls, the city paused. Because Jerusalem remembers. This is a city whose stones have witnessed coronations and crucifixions, exile and return, triumph and tragedy. These stones have outlasted kings, empires, and armies, and so when they move even slightly, people listen. Yet, beyond the physical, there lies a spiritual undercurrent, a sense that this is not merely geology but a gesture, not an accident but an echo. Beloved, the prophets of old spoke not only through words but through signs, and sometimes God himself used signs so quiet that only the spiritually awake heard them. Elijah expected God in the fire, in the wind, in the quake, but found him in a still small voice. What if the crack by the eastern gate is one such voice? To understand the weight of this, we must understand the gate itself. The eastern gate, also called the Golden Gate, has stood sealed for centuries. According to Jewish tradition, it will remain shut until the Messiah enters it. According to Ezekiel's vision, it is the place where the glory of the Lord returns. So, when a fracture begins at the threshold of that very gate, in a moment of global instability, when conflicts tighten like cords around the city, and when Israel faces internal and external pressures unlike any in recent memory, what are we to think? Some may say, coincidence. But the faithful say, pay attention. Ezekiel wrote, "And the glory of the Lord came into the house by the way of the gate, whose prospect is toward the east." Zechariah wrote of the Mount of Olives splitting in two. Jesus himself entered Jerusalem from the east in the days before his crucifixion. Every thread of prophecy pulls our eyes back to that direction eastward. And now, even the stones there are shifting. Coincidence or convergence? We must be wise enough to ask. There has never been a moment in history when Jerusalem stirred without consequences far beyond its walls. The city is more than geography, it is spiritual geography. A crossroads of divine intentions and human rebellions, a place where heaven's script meets earth's stage. So what does this crack mean in the wider narrative? Let us consider three possibilities, three lenses through which prophetic people may interpret this moment. Hebrews reminds us that God will once more shake not only the earth, but also the heavens, so that what cannot be shaken will remain. Sometimes the shaking begins not with violence, but with a subtle sign, a prelude. Before the temple veil tore, the land trembled. Before judgment came on Jerusalem in AD 70, warnings multiplied. Before Israel was scattered, prophets cried out from every corner. A fracture on the eastern wall could signify a coming tremor, physical, political, or spiritual. When Jesus approached Jerusalem, he wept. He wept because the city did not know the time of its visitation. Beloved, could it be that we are repeating that tragedy? Seeing signs, yet refusing to interpret them? Hearing warnings, yet continuing in our distractions? The stones cry out, not because people listen, but because they won't. And yet, every sign is not doom. Some signs are promises. If the eastern gate is associated with the Messiah's coming, the fracture may also symbolize that history is moving slowly, steadily, toward fulfillment. The nations rage, but God's timetable does not falter. The fracture might be a whisper of hope, that what has long been sealed will not remain sealed forever, that what has been silent will not always be quiet, that the King who came once will come again. But, beloved, a sign is only as valuable as the hearts able to interpret it. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16:18. Chrysostom has aptly called pride the mother of hell, for hell, with all its horrors, is its hideous offspring. Had there been no treacherous pride, there would have been no bottomless pit. Perdition was prepared for the devil and his angels, and pride prepared the devil and his angels for perdition. We need fear no language we can possibly use, being too strong to denounce pride, for as Aristotle says, as justice comprehends all virtue in it, so pride comprehends all vice. Is drunkenness to be condemned with unmeasured severity? Then let pride be equally so, for it is nothing less than a spiritual drunkenness. It flies as wine to the brain and produces the same result. No wretched drunkard, reeling along the road, is a more pitiable or disgusting sight than the man who is intoxicated into idiocy with the alcohol of his own accursed pride. May the most unsparing language be employed in the denunciation of the sin of idolatry. Then let it be equally strong in the condemnation of pride, for they are one. The proud man is simply one who bends the knee and worships a more hateful idol than can ever be found in the whole catalogue of heathendom. And its name is self. God loathes pride, for everyone that is proud is an abomination to the Lord. Pro 16.5. To an angel's eye, it must be the ugliest thing on earth, and the saint, often deploring it, hates it with a perfect hatred. But although universally condemned, it is too generally harbored, and it is easy work to find 1,000 excuses for the particular species of pride we possess, which is almost always, according to our own estimate, only proper pride. Although the chief occupation of the minister should be the telling forth of the simple gospel message to perishing souls, and so preaching as ever to be able to say with Paul, "We preach Christ," yet it is also his imperative duty to cry out against particular sins and lay the axe at the root of special iniquities. I want this evening, by God's help, to strike a blow at the deadly root of pride. I have no doubt many things I may say will be considered too severe. I cannot help it if they are. The language of my text is strong and unvarnished enough. The truth it contains is put in the most uncomplimentary mode, and I would be a traitor were I to attempt to smooth it down. My work is to declare that pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. I will first of all try and illustrate the truthfulness of the text by scripture examples, and then next, apply the text to various cases. First, then, let me try and illustrate the text by scripture examples. I purpose to have 8 terrible witnesses to the fact that pride goes before destruction, 8 panoramic views, proving that a haughty spirit precedes a fall. The Lord grant that every illustration may be as a hammer driving the nail home, until at last the truth is clinched in our hearts, never to be withdrawn. 1. The first witnesses I shall call from hell in Satan and his compeers. There can be but little question that the sin which hurled Satan as lightning from heaven to hell was pride. It was pride that drew a third part of the stars of heaven from the glittering firmament and quenched their light forever in the blackness of despair. 'Twas pride that emptied a myriad thrones and made hell groan with so stupendous a load of damned spirits. The conception of England's greatest poet is not only grand, but one that bears the stamp of probability that the cause of Satan's revolt and overthrow was his proud refusal to bend the knee to Christ. The mandate had gone forth from the everlasting Father's lips. "Hear, all you angels, progeny of light, thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, hear my decree, which unrevoked shall stand. This day have I begot, whom I declare, my only Son, and on this holy hill him have appointed whom you now behold. At my right hand your head I him appoint, and by myself have sworn, to him shall bow all knees in heaven, and shall confess him Lord." Satan refused to do this, and raised an impious war in heaven. Then forth to the conquest came the Son, his countenance too severe to be beheld. On his fierce chariot rolled, as with the sound of 10,000 floods. Right on his foes he onward drove, in his right hand grasping 1,000 thunderbolts, and swept them thunderstruck before him to the gaping jaws of hell. Down, down they fell through liquid seas of fire, while eternal wrath burnt after them to the bottomless pit. Thus, in Milton's language concerning Satan's ruin, him, the almighty power, hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky, with hideous ruin and combustion, down to bottomless perdition, there to dwell. In adamantine chains and penal fire, who dared defy the omnipotent to arms? Inscribed over the portals of hell, written in letters of livid flame, engraved on the fetters of eternal brass, I read, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. For God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Genesis 3-5. 2. The next illustration of the text I find in the fall of our first parents. "In the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God." The same accursed pride that introduced war, defeat, and ruin into heaven brought into God's fair earth sorrow, sickness, death. The same hateful motives influenced Eve, as Satan, too proud to submit to a prohibition that was all love, her hand took and her mouth tasted the forbidden fruit. Oh, how can this lip describe the dire result? How tell the fall that followed? I think nature must have sighed. The clouds wept, the storm muttered, and Satan laughed. Eden's beauty was blasted. Innocence fled. Death stalked through the garden glades. Mankind was ruined. From that first act of sin, what an awful harvest of sorrow has been reaped. The misery of ages may be traced to that revolt. Had there been no pride, there would have been no wars, no wrecks, no families, no orphans, no widows. But, through a haughty spirit, all have fallen. Man, made in his Maker's likeness, the crown of creation work, has lost his beauty, and now far more resembles hell than heaven. Man, that was made for happiness, is now born for sorrow as the sparks fly upward. Job 5.7. The world, that was made an Eden, now brings forth the briar and the thorn, while the whole creation groans and travails in pain together until now. Romans 8.22. In every storm that rends the air, in every tear that rolls the cheek, in every groan that escapes the breast, in every churchyard that holds its dead, and in the great mass of sorrow that lies with crushing weight upon humanity, I see sad testimonies to the truthfulness of the text. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. 3. The third witness I select to prove pride to be the pioneer of destruction is Pharaoh. For many a long and weary year, the people of Israel had been crushed into the dust by the iron heel of despotism. Their servitude had grown beyond endurance. The taskmaster and his whip had driven them to despair. One long, piercing cry ascended from their hearts to heaven. Mercy heard that cry and determined deliverance. Moses and Aaron, two messengers of the Lord, enter into the presence of the imperial despot and deliver the edict given them. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, "Let my people go." It would have been happy for Pharaoh if, swallowing his pride, he had obeyed the request and let the people go. With scornful haughtiness he replied, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." Exo 5.1-2. Thus spoke pride, and truly it went. Before destruction, 10 devastating plagues like successive thunderclaps rolled through the land. The river ran blood, streams and pools all were blood. It was blood, blood on every hand. The land was red with it, but still pride held out. The dust was turned to lice. The flies swarmed everywhere. Boils broke out on man and beast. The hail swept in pitiless storms. The lightning ran along the ground. The locusts marched as an army through the land, leaving famine in their rear. Darkness grim and awful enveloped all. Yet still pride remained unhumbled. And now at midnight, one doleful shriek rings throughout Egypt, for in every house the firstborn lies a corpse. Before so awful a destruction, pride staggered, and Israel was commanded to go. And now comes the closing scene to this tragedy of a haughty spirit. I see the fugitive host as it presses onward with trembling haste to the shores of the Red Sea. It has now reached them. The mountains are on each side. The sea glitters in front and behind. Ah, what is it they hear? The shouts of men, the neighing horses, and the rumbling of chariots. What does it mean? It means this, that pride is bent on full destruction. No sooner had Israel escaped than the old pride which had already cursed a country returned. "What have I done to let Israel go?" it asked. "How shall I bear the laughter of surrounding nations?" "To arms! To arms!" it cried. "Draw out the chariots, harness the steeds, equip the cavalry of Egypt for war. After them quick. Bring them back in chains. Retrieve the honor we have lost. Let it never be said they thus escaped a Pharaoh. I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My lust shall be satisfied upon them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. Now, in obedience to pride, the mad host follows after. It sees the fugitives in front. It laughs in savage glee. They are ours, they are ours, it cries. The Red Sea shuts them in, but the cloudy pillar came between the two camps as an impassable barrier. So they did not come near the Israelites all night. And now, the waters of the Red Sea divide and pile themselves in glassy walls on either side, while Israel passes through. The cloud lifting shows the proud despot the fugitives gathering fast upon the opposite shore. Drunken with pride, he rushes with his host between the watery walls. With shouts, they urge the war horse on, but all in vain. The Lord took off their chariot wheels, for in mid-ocean they had to learn his power. Who can describe the horror of that moment, when the watery walls, loosed by the hand of God, leapt into each other's embrace? Now, Pharaoh, ask, who is the Lord, that I should obey him? But no, the waves for a moment roll in glee, and when all again is calm, not a vestige of pride's army is to be seen, except here and there, some lifeless forms that are sullenly washed ashore. Surely the rushing waters and the drowning shrieks of Pharaoh's host form an awful commentary on the text. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. 4. Our fourth illustration is that of Korah and his company. Pride had taken possession of these sons of Levi, and shown itself in seeking the priesthood. They gathered together against Moses and against Aaron, and said to them, You take too much upon you, seeing that all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then lift yourselves up above the congregation of the Lord? Num 16.3. Dumbfounded by such a charge, Moses falls back upon the Lord to vindicate him, and he replies to them, Even tomorrow the Lord will show who are his, and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. Num 16.5. The morrow's light has come, and destruction walks closely upon the heels of Korah's pride. All Israel stands around the presumptuous company, who, with their censers in their hands, are at the dictation of their own mad pride, about to assume the priesthood. The warning voice of Moses is heard in ringing tones, crying, Get back, back, back from the tents of these men, lest you be consumed in all their sins. Num 16.26. Horror-stricken, the crowd shrinks from them until Korah and his company are left alone, the object of the gaze of the whole people. Again the voice of Moses is heard. If these men die the common death of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. Num 16.29. There was a moment's pause of deathless silence, a trembling of the ground, and the earth yawned, and into that horrible abyss fell tents and men. Down alive they went into the pit, and the earth again closed her mouth, and they were seen no more forever. Those falling tents, those looks of unutterable horror and despair, those smothered cries, must surely have proclaimed to the ears of Israel, as they do to us this evening, Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. 5. The next scene is a warrior host, like the sands of the sea for multitude, and flushed with presumptuous joy and confidence through many a victory in the past. Its proud monarch and commander is named Sennacherib. With boastful spirit, he sends a taunting letter to trembling Hezekiah, king of Judah. The epistle ran, Do not let your God in whom you trusted deceive you, saying, Jerusalem shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands by destroying them utterly. And shall you be delivered? 2 King 19.1-11. Thus blasphemously wrote the conqueror. drunken with his pride. At his wits' end, Hezekiah went up into the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. The answer quickly came, I will put my hook in his nose and my bridle in his lips, and will turn him back by the way which he came. 2. King 19.1428. Do you see the proud host? Their myriad tents spreading on every hand, and banners gently waving in the evening air. Listen to their proud scoffs as they jest about the God of Israel, and think him to be such a one as the gods of Hamath and Arphad. Their pride is as great as their host. But stay, you haughty king of Assyria. Do not boast yourself before the battle's fought. You have yet to learn that pride goes before destruction. That night in proud security slept the Assyrian host. They slept, but never woke. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast, and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed. And the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts but once heaved, and forever grew still. And there lay the rider, distorted and pale, with the dew on his arrow and the rust on his mail. And the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. Thus, with one sweeping stroke of omnipotence, Jehovah made the haughty Assyrian bite the dust. Those silent tents, those death-glazed eyes, those rigid forms, that army of the silent dead, all preach one awful sermon from the same text we have heard before. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. 6. A proud monarch takes his stand upon the roof of his palace, and as he looks down upon the streets and buildings of the huge capital, pride swells within the breast, and he boastingly exclaims, Is this not great Babylon that I have built? While the word was on his lip, there fell a voice from heaven, saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken. The kingdom is departed from you. Dan 4.3-31. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon the haughty monarch. Reason reeled and bewildered, left her throne. The imperious monarch was driven from among men, and ate grass like the oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven. His hair grew like eagle's feathers, and his nails became like birds' claws. At the appointed time, God had mercy on the raving madman, and reason returned. Then the once haughty despot lifted up his eyes to heaven, and exclaimed, Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, know that those that walk in pride, he is able to abase. Dan 4.37. 7. Yet one other illustration of the text found in the Old Testament. The scene is a banquet hall. Around the table are many guests, presided over by a merry, thoughtless, haughty king. The goblets, freely drained by the blasphemous crew, were once used in the solemn worship of Jehovah. Drunken mirth is at its height, and pride has reached the climax, when a sight appears that sobers every reveler. A mysterious hand, and nothing but a hand, is seen writing a more mysterious message on the wall, right over the head of the amazed monarch. When all the wise men and astrologers have done their best, but failed to interpret the warning, Daniel, the servant of the Most High God, declares, Because you, O Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, but have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. Therefore this writing was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Dan 5.22-25. In that same night, Belshazzar was slain. Inscribed on that wall by that bodiless hand was the truth, if not the words of our text. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. 8. I have already dwelt upon this first division far longer than I intended. So in a very few words, let me call upon the New Testament to introduce its witness. A kingly orator, clothed in purple, addresses a deputation from the coasts of Tyre and Sidon. His eloquence warms them, besides which their cringing nature prompts applause. With one impulse they shouted, "This is the voice of a god, and not of a man." Act 12.22. Herod smiled approvingly. His pride was stroked the right way. No indignant repudiation of the flattery fell from his lip. For a moment he stood in the full enjoyment of gratified pride. It was but for a moment. With a cry of horror, the group of flatterers saw him fall. They rushed to his help. 'Tis all too late. For struck by the angel of the Lord, he lies as one mass of corruption, eaten up by worms. That rotting corpse unites its testimony with the 7 witnesses we have already heard, that pride is the pioneer of destruction. God grant that you may be led by the mouth of so many witnesses to believe the warning. Having, I trust, proved by scripture illustration the veracity of the statement, there is now nothing left for me to do, but to apply its truth. This I will try and do. 1. First to the individual. Is there one here who, in the common expression of the day, has been making headway in life? Then, to him I speak. It is not long ago, friend, since in your own language, you were nothing. You could always tell how much you were worth, without the trouble of reckoning. In fact, you could not have counted your assets had you tried, for they were nil. Your wealth was always, in an uncomfortable sense, untold. But now things have changed with you. Business speculations have turned out successfully, and you begin to be the envied, rather than the pitied personage. You are admitted into circles which were previously closed against you, and you are now learning the truth of the proverb, "Nothing succeeds like success." Ask the Lord, dear friend, to give you grace to keep humble. For it is as difficult to carry a full cup without pride as it is an empty one, devoid of murmuring. Shun all pride. If you would have prosperity continued, for he who does not know how to carry the cup aright will soon have no cup at all to carry. Pride has ruined more than economic panics, and a haughty spirit is a shortcut to the workhouse. If this text applies with any power to temporal concerns, it does so far more to spiritual concerns. Am I speaking to one who considers himself invulnerable to the attacks of Satan? Then, to him I would give the warning, "Let him that thinks he stands take heed lest he fall." 1 Cor 10.12. We are never so near a fall as when we consider such an event impossible. The path of the spiritually proud is full of pitfalls. Indeed, the very pride itself is the commencement of the fall. I tremble for the man who has never trembled for himself. He walks on the edge of an unseen precipice, and requires but the breath of a temptation to send him headlong over. He falls deepest, who falls highest, and pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Terribly true also is this text, in relation to work for the Lord. Many a minister has had his usefulness blasted through it. Many a work, fair and good in its commencement, has been stayed and withered by pride's blighting influence. Pride, as well as unbelief, hinders Christ from doing any great thing through its possessor. The stream of divine blessing only flows in any copious measure through the channel of a humble spirit. "Too proud to be used in the Lord's service" might be written upon the brow of many. God save all those of us who are in any way workers in His vineyard from so horrible a verdict. It is indeed a solemn thought that there are this evening thousands of living testimonies to the fact that, whether in business, spiritual life, or the Lord's work, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. 2. The text is as true of churches as individuals, and certainly most true of that church which styles itself the established church. It is not the efforts of the Liberation Society, nor acts of Parliament that will be its overthrow, but its own internal pride. A church that boasts its archbishops, lord bishops, right reverends, very reverends, and I know not what other unscriptural titles besides, is a doomed one, apart from any outward opposition brought to bear upon it. But let us not think that as dissenters we are free from all danger. Pride can lurk in the little chapel as much as the great cathedral, and be found in her ministers as well as in Anglican priests. Dying of dignity is the unhappy condition of many a dissenting congregation. If there is one thing I dread more than another, it is lest through the abundance of blessing bestowed upon us, church pride should creep in. Oh, pray it out, and keep it out, if you would see the work continued in our midst. For, let the hideous monster but rear its ugly head, then farewell blessing, while Ichabod will be engraved on every wall. 3. Thirdly, and lastly, I would apply the text to the lost sinner. Dear friend, your pride precedes a destruction too terrific for me to paint in language. Your haughty spirit goes before a fall so deep that it reaches hell. Do you say, what pride? The pride that keeps you from confessing yourself a lost sinner. The pride that refuses to stoop to God's plan of salvation. The pride that makes you gather the filthy rags of your own supposed righteousness around you while you despise the spotless robe that a Savior offers. The pride that makes you want to pay for salvation instead of receiving it as a free gift. Here is pride enough to sink a soul to eternal hell. Do you still stand aloof from simple trust, as a guilty sinner in the atonement of Jesus, thinking that though such a way of salvation may suit a Mary Magdalene or a dying thief, it is far beneath your acceptance? Then your pride will be your destruction, for there is no other way whereby you can be saved. What? Too proud to come to Christ? Too proud to be saved? Alas! You will not be too proud to be damned, for as God's ambassador I declare that though pride can never enter heaven, it does live eternally in hell. Down with your pride, sinner, or it will, down with you. Go now and tell the Lord that your pride is broken, your haughty spirit is quenched, and that as the very worst of sinners you are willing to be saved by sovereign mercy through Christ. Do not lose your soul to save your pride, but lose your pride to save your soul. May the Lord bless tonight's warning to all. May its notes ring in our ears for many a day to come. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs is true. A haughty spirit goes before a fall, and something before destruction just occurred in Jerusalem. While you are listening to this, while most of the Western world lies in that deep, heavy silence that comes just before dawn, thousands of people literally stopped their chores, left their places, cancelled their appointments and commitments, and rushed to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem when they saw something no one expected. It was not an earthquake. It was not air rage. It was not some statement on a political stage. What happened was far older, far deeper, far more significant than anything a news reporter could broadcast. And what's even more shocking is the global media, totally silent. Mainstream kept focusing on fast-consuming content, on scandal, on whether the most cutting-edge technology belongs to which country, on which celebrities just got divorced, on the money that should be used for more meaningful work than outward glamour. Something that's making waves not just in Israel, but around the entire world. Something that left even the most non-believers speechless. Something that made rabbis get up at midnight with their hearts racing. That made prophecy teachers close their laptops and grab their phones. That made pastors, priests, and spiritual leaders from very different backgrounds all send the same urgent message to one another. Are you seeing this? And what makes this absolutely extraordinary isn't just what appeared, but where it appeared and when it appeared. Because it isn't just any ordinary city, but Jerusalem. It's the most prophetically charged location in the entire Bible, with the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, the Golden Gate, the Gethsemane Garden, and most significant, the Mount of Olives. Something is happening at the place where Jesus ascended to heaven before the disciples, where the Bible specifically prophesies that Jesus will return visibly when he comes back to earth. And something is making people worldwide pay attention. When you get the terrifying truth exactly happening there, when you capture the prophetic connection impossible to ignore, when you relate the implications of the timing of all this, you'll understand why thousands of people reacted like a programmed chain, shocked, then stunned, then panicked, and then fled. Because we're not talking about coincidence. We're talking about sign from God through verifiable physical events. The countdown to the appointed time is pacing faster than you could imagine.